Hey guys, this is Tony. I just wanted to do this video on how to replace a plastic Venturi mount on a Cox 010 TD engine. Now this is something I've just learned how to do recently because I really had never done it, and I thought, well, I've got to figure out how to get this done. So I called my good buddy Steve, and he was kind enough to describe the process, so I thought I'd do a video to let you all know how to get it done. One of the things I'd always been concerned about when looking at this is, how in the world do you get this collet and get that thrust plate off there, the dry plate off, without stripping out the collet? And sure enough, you in fact can do it through this process. But I added a little tip here, and I'll show you in a minute on how to do it to minimize the damage to the collet, because getting parts for these 010s is not easy anymore. They're rare to find them, and then when you do find them, they're quite expensive. So you really want to take a lot of care in disassembling this engine. So first thing you do here, and I'll try to keep it in the video, so I have this really weird, awkward setup here to do this for you guys, but I've already got this fairly loose, and just back the spinner off here and pull the prop off, and you can see this thing is well used. I'm replacing the Venturi because this thing had been exposed to sun for quite a long time. It was actually a display piece, and so before I go to fly the engine, I want to make sure I've got good parts on this engine. So went ahead and loosened using a standard Cox wrench. Went ahead and loosened the Venturi here. So broke that loose already, and I'll go ahead and just unscrew this assembly. And set that off to the side. And you can see here, I've got the Venturi. And a lot of times what you'll find in these engines, which makes them not run or have issues running, is you get air leaks because there's cracks here in this plastic piece. And so when that occurs, you can't get it to run. I had a flight recently where I was trying to get the thing to run, and I finally got it to run one time, and as it was heating up and vibrating, eventually the engine quit. And when I took a closer look at it, sure enough, the Venturi had split, the mount had split back here, and it was sucking air, and it wouldn't run. And no matter what I did, I couldn't get it to run. So the temporary fix was I just put a drop of CA glue in that crack, and then just hit it with a little accelerator for the time being. But I knew it wouldn't last very long, and in fact it didn't. It became brittle and eventually started leaking again. So this assembly needed to be replaced. And you can find that assembly, which is here. You can find it on this Model Engine Company of America, their website, MCOA. And so let's get into taking this off. So you look at this and you go, man, how in the world am I going to get that off there without damaging it? And you look at this piece and you think, well, if you unscrew that, it'll eventually push it off. But I was so concerned about the collet stripping, but in fact it does a really good job. So one of the things you can do in order to help minimize damage is you can just take a heat gun and heat this entire assembly up, especially if it's been gummed up with old castor oil and the fit here is quite tight. And once you've applied some heat to it and loosened everything up, then it doesn't require as much force to get it off. Now here's the tip that I will share with you that I did just to minimize damage to the last collet. So I'm taking a piece of paper towel and a little bit of 70% isopropyl alcohol, and just cleaning any residue off the engine here. So just wiping this whole collet down just to get any of that oily residue off. Just clean that up a bit. Now that that's all dried, then I just took a small strip of electrical tape here. Let me get a piece here that I've already pre-cut for you. Okay, there you go, piece of electrical tape, and what I do is I just tack it to the back of the collet here. Just get it on there and then rub it down, primarily on the collet, not as much on the drive plate, so it's fairly loose. You can cut this a thinner strip. I did on the last one, but I cut this a little bit wide. So I just loosen this up just a touch around the drive plate. And this way, when you go to apply the wrench, what you'll do is you have the wrench here, and you see you've got that little notch piece right here, and that guy goes in the hole on the collet itself. And what I found is by putting that piece of electrical tape, it gives you a better grip. The wrench has a much better grip, prevents any slippage, and also minimizes or basically eliminates any damage to the collet itself. So here, slowly starting to turn it, and I say just take your time here, don't rush it. But as you slowly start turning it out, it'll eventually, I'll get a good grip on the cylinder itself, it'll eventually start to push the drive plate off. Nice and easy here. As you rotate that guy. Now you'll hear the piston in fact is moving, and the other trick you can do, it's still allowing the drive plate to come off. The other thing you can do is you could just take another wrench, if you have another one, and you could stick it down inside here. I was concerned it would gouge, the piston, but it doesn't do that at all. You can actually hold it in with your thumb, keep it in place, and then continue to rotate, and that'll stop the piston from spinning as well if you want to do that. But I didn't find it to be necessary, so I'll just continue to slowly turn this out. Now that I say that, there it goes. So it came off. And here, let me grab that assembly for you. So here you are. So you pull the tape off, and there's your drive plate there. Get that centered a bit more. And then, of course, you have the collet here. And then there's your assembly with the collet removed. It's just as simple as that. And believe it or not, that worried me for quite some time, because I had talked to other people who said, you've got to be really careful with these 010s because it doesn't take much to damage them. And that was intimidating. And I thought, whoa, I don't want to ruin one of these expensive engines, because they are quite expensive nowadays. But thankfully, a good friend with a lot of experience said, no, that's the way it comes off, and you just take your time, and sure enough, there's the trick. So the next challenge is you've got to get this Venturi, plastic Venturi mount off. And sometimes they come off easy, and sometimes they don't. In this case, this guy is on there a little bit, but just a little wiggle, and it pulled off. And there it is. And you can see there's a little bit of caster residue on there, so I'll clean that up with some alcohol. And let's do that now. Let's get a little alcohol and get all that cleaned up. I use 70% isopropyl. I found that in the past I was experimenting with an old Baby B that I had, and it was so heavily coated with old gunked up caster that I soaked it in some 90% alcohol, isopropyl alcohol, and in fact it started to mar or discolor the aluminum a little bit. So I went ahead and stayed away from the 90% and just strictly using the 70%. And I don't soak them anymore now. You just wipe them down, and you can stick them in a crock pot, an old crock pot with some antifreeze, and you can heat it up that way to get some of the old caster out. But I find that just straight old isopropyl alcohol does a really good job. That and a heat gun. Yeah, if you have some real stubborn caster, baked on caster, just apply your standard covering heat gun. Just apply some heat to it, and it will loosen up a stuck piston and a gummed up crankshaft really well. And then I just go through a process of just squirting in a little bit of alcohol in it and then slowly rotating it, and eventually once that alcohol evaporates, then I use Rizalone, which is an engine treatment, and I'll kind of squirt in or put in some Rizalone. And you can see Cox International sells something called the Cox Lube. It's an after-run oil. Basically it's Rizalone is what it is, and you just add a little bit inside the exhaust port, and you slowly rotate the engine, and then you put some inside the Venturi, and it will get rid of all of that residue and just free it up nicely. But I love to heat the engine up really well first, because I want that old caster to pretty much liquefy to the point that after I've got it heated up, then I can just run a little alcohol in there, flush as much of that old residue out before I put the Rizalone in there. And then I add a few drops of Rizalone, heat it up again, turn it a few times, and you'll see there'll be a bit of a green tinge to the Rizalone, and I'll wipe it down until eventually it's nothing but the blue color of the product. And that tells me that I've got most of the old residue out, and frees up a stuck engine. And we've saved one to live another day, which is what it's all about. A lot of guys are collecting them, and that's wonderful, but I love to fly them and use them and keep them in the air for as long as I can. And there seems to be a bit of a resurgence now with guys coming back into balsa in these little Cox engines. So what we do now is just try to share the information with as many people as possible to keep these little engines flying, because I've been doing electrics for 10 years, but these guys are really my heart. So enough babbling about that. So now we've got it cleaned up a bit. And I won't do a full clean restoration here. I just want to demonstrate how to replace that Venturi. And that's basically the gist of it. You can actually go through and you put a couple of drops of the Rizalone in there. Get that in there, and you can rotate this guy a little bit. And you can see it start to rotate. Get some of that in there just to free it up a bit. Wipe off some of that excess. Make sure everything's clean. Threads are fairly decent. Sorry, I'm not keeping it in the video very well. This is my first instructional video for Cox engines. It's funny because I'd been looking for a long time on YouTube to see if there was any videos to go through this process, but I hadn't seen one on the TDs. Maybe I wasn't looking in the right place, but So that she's cleaned up. Now we'll get the new Venturi assembly, and it's a keyed assembly. As a matter of fact, you'll see here there's a notch. It's like a raised piece just on the inside there. Let's see if I get that clear. You can see it just on the inside. So you can't twist it on. It's not threaded on. It's just a straight push on. So once you get it on, you line it up, and that key will help keep it lined up straight on the engine. And then you just reverse the steps. You get the collet, put the collet back on. And I won't tighten everything up because I'll take it apart and do a proper cleaning, but you'll see you put the collet back on. And then what I do is just apply another piece of the electrical tape on this side, and then I just begin to turn it. And I don't turn it too tight. You don't want to get to the point where you put so much pressure on the plastic that you'll cause it to split prematurely. So you just get it to seat, and then maybe turn it a quarter of a turn just till you feel a little bit of tension there, and that's usually good enough. And then from there, you reinstall the drive plate. And I won't tighten everything down, but you'll just sort of press it on, and then what you can do is you'll add the prop and the spinner back on, you'll screw it on, and then as you tighten down the spinner, it will actually push the drive plate on. Now, for some reason, if the bolt is too long and you can't get it to screw down, then you can actually take the spinner hub off, and you can try to screw it down with just a washer and the prop alone to get this drive plate to compress, or you can add two props onto that. I found that when I did two props and I tightened it down with a washer, it was just the perfect length to be able to drive that plate all the way back and seat it, and then and I was good to go. There's no binding there. It moved freely, and everything worked out fine. So just a quick instructional video for you all to save these little guys, and then basically, same thing again. Reverse process. You'll stick the Venturi on, you'll screw it back on, and you're good to go. Again, a key factor here is not to over tighten this assembly. Get that Venturi here, and let me see if I can grab it here. Get this guy on here. And it's a simple case of you take the needle assembly out because it'll make it easier. You really don't want that in the way, especially as you're trying to turn it. So I'll pull the needle assembly out. I won't bore you with all the cleaning details here that I usually like to do to get these things cleaned up. But again, it's usually rubbing alcohol, Q-tip to get inside the Venturi, and then just flush everything out with a syringe and some alcohol as well, just to flush all the orifices out. You try to get this assembly cleaned up. Again, if it's gummed up with a lot of castor, then I'll heat it up with the heat gun, and you'll see that old castor oil start to bubble. It'll bubble inside the holes. It'll bubble down inside there. And then just a process of taking a fine needle to run through the hole to get that hole cleaned out, or to flush, just take a syringe full of rubbing alcohol and just take it and squirt it. So I'll cap off one end here, and I'll cap off the Venturi, or vice versa. I can cap off this end and then squirt it through the needle valve port and force it through this nipple assembly where the fuel line connects to. And a few times repeating that process, and you've got a squeaky clean assembly. You also, another thing I'll point out, because you think, okay, I've got that cleaned out, it should be good to go, shouldn't have any problems, but you've got to do one other verification here. I know I'm getting ahead of myself. But you can actually take your finger and hold it over the nipple end here, and then squirt it down through here, and you want to see fuel coming out of that little hole there. So that's obviously what's providing your fuel into your Venturi. So you want to make sure that not only you've got good fuel flow coming through here and here, but also through that hole as well as the Venturi itself. There are tiny holes in the Venturi, and you want to make sure that you get all that stuff flushed out of there, because if you don't get good fuel flow through here, you're going to be cranking on an engine for quite some time and wondering why you can't get the thing to run. So again, heat gun, alcohol, Q-tip, just flush this assembly out until everything is looking really good and clean through the holes there, and you've done yourself an awful lot of a big favor, because otherwise I've watched a lot of people over the years, and I included, especially in the early days, of cranking on an engine forever, and it would run off the prime and it would not stay running, and I couldn't figure out what in the world was going on. And sure enough, it's just old castor debris that are in those fine holes. Same thing with the needle valve assembly. Make sure you clean the threads, clean that needle valve really good. You want everything squeaky clean and good fuel flow, and you will be in business. And you'll find that once you've done this type of maintenance, these things run fantastic. And then after you've done running for a season, take some of that after run oil. I usually take rubbing alcohol, and I'll flush everything with rubbing alcohol initially, and then I'll put a few drops of the after run oil down the Venturi and the exhaust ports, crank it over a few times by hand just to get everything running through there. or you can even go through a much deeper process of pulling off the tank, making sure the tank assembly has been cleaned out with a little alcohol, pulling everything out here, making sure the back of the engine crankcase is all clean, and then again a little bit after run oil, and then just reassemble everything and let it sit for however long you keep in storage. I find though, if I've run these engines, every 6 months or so, don't really need to do a lot of that. But if they sit, for a year or two, then obviously it's going to require a little bit of that after run oil. The other thing you can do is wrap them in a towel or paper towel, and then you can minimize how much air is getting in here and deteriorating the plastic. Definitely don't leave these things exposed to sun. You can see this particular engine here, it was a display engine that was actually mounted to a piece of wood and just kept in somebody's office, I guess, or somewhere in their house, and sunlight had gotten to it, so the tank had been really faded. You can see here where the oil hadn't gotten to it. Really faded, as well as the Venturi here was faded, and it's starting to get quite brittle. So all of this stuff you want to keep in good working order. If you get on Cox International or EX model engines, they have replacement parts for these engines, as well as aluminum. Now they've got really nice aluminum replacement pieces for longevity, and keep you in the game for many, many years to come. So all things to consider here to keep these little guys running. I guess, not as many people are running the O10s because they are quite collectible and rare, but, I can't take them with me when I'm dead, so I go out there and I enjoy them, and it just brings a smile on my face to get a good engine running, to be able to watch these things pull a little tiny plane around the sky. And they sound neat as well, so hope this information has been helpful. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the comments, and I'll try to get to them. But I hope this at least gives you a little more confidence in going through and restoring some of those old engines that may be sitting in a box, gummed up, and you're intimidated to go through the process of repairing them because you don't know what to do. Hopefully this will give you a little bit of insight on how to make these changes. And the same thing with the tank. It's a couple of screws here. The back plate comes off, and there's 4 screws there, and that whole assembly comes out. And those tanks are also available on RC, on EX model engines, as well as Model Engine Company of America and Cox International. Hope this has been helpful, and thanks for watching.